So clearly, resources don't explain the success or failure of these two different bridges. What does? Incentives. The Romans would always test their bridges before they used them. They would load up this huge ox cart full of heavy stones and drive it across the bridge. And if the bridge didn't fall down under that heavy load, then it was safe to use. And here's the thing. The Romans made the guy who designed the bridge drive that first cart across it. So he had a very personal incentive in building the strongest bridge possible. And that's why some Roman bridges are still standing after 2,000 years, and some of our modern bridges fall down. Our second story takes place on the Korean Peninsula, which is split between North Korea and South Korea. Here's a satellite picture taken at night. You can see South Korea all lit up like neighboring China because it's a thriving developed economy. And you can also see North Korea, which has a similar population, but it's catastrophically underdeveloped. What explains the difference? Well, these two countries have the same geography, the same climate, and the same resources, so that can't be. Up until 1945, North and South Korea were the same country, so they share the same history, the same language, the same religion, the same culture, so that can't be. The difference is that South Korea has a market-based economy, and it's been a democracy since the 1970s. North Korea, on the other hand, is one of the world's last remaining communist dictatorships. Again, the difference is incentives. A market democracy sets up incentives for innovation and investment that aren't there in a communist dictatorship. And incentives explain why resource-poor Japan is actually very wealthy, while many African countries are very poor. Japan is democratic, has the rule of law, and protects property rights. And all those institutions create incentives for economic growth. Whereas, for a variety of historical reasons, many developing countries don't have those institutions, which means their citizens have less incentive to invest and innovate. The effect of incentives is so strong that it can be seen from space.
Who is that Yukon guy?
I'm Patrick Walsh. I'm an associate professor of economics at St. Michael's College.
All right. So get your last things down there. Have you guys seen that picture of North Korea and South Korea in the evening? Yeah. So kind of an interesting physical representation of different things. So I want to kind of circle back to why we're learning some of this stuff to get a better feel for what economic freedom is and how it gets measured by our previous alumni, Jim Gortney, with the Economic Freedom Index, who one of the last videos he was in explaining parts of the Freedom Index. So again, here's our working definition that you need to have memorized for the test. Individuals have economic freedom when property they acquire without the use of force, fraud, or theft is protected from physical invasions by others, and they are free to use, exchange, or give property as long as their actions don't violate the identical rights of others. So individual economic freedom, that's kind of our working definition. And so then we're saying, to what degree do people get to do that in different countries around the world, right? Depending on how they're set up. So how that gets measured, let me switch this to that. So Jim and his colleagues have looked at 162 countries, 42 different variables that measure the degree to which that seems to happen given the certain laws that are on the books or lack of laws for that matter. And all of this gets distilled down into a single number. That's really a simple average as it works through. So the 5 areas are the size of the government. So when we look at our cigarettes was the expenditure approach to measuring real GDP. So here's all of the economic activity. For the United States, how many dollars is that roughly?
20 trillion.
20 trillion. So we got 20 trill worth of stuff going on, and that's composed of these components, where consumption is usually our beer and chicken wings type of stuff, is about 70% of our total. We did this way back when we measured the expenditure approach. So investment, somewhere in the 15 to 20% range. Buying new machines, buildings, equipment, stuff that helps make other stuff. We had new construction homes in there. Government spending, again, kind of in this approximately 20% range. And then this one in the -5 to 10% range. So it kind of waffles around. The percentages ultimately need to be adding up to 100%. But that's the US economy. And so one of the variables with number 1 is this one right here, basically. What is the amount of government spending that's going on as a fraction of a country's GDP? That's one way to look at things, that if the government's spending money, then they got to get that money from someplace. You're not spending it, right? So less of the decision making is residing within the individuals in the country, and more of the decision making is being decided in Washington, D.C. among Congress and the president and other people, right? So decision making is kind of being shifted to the government as we go here. So in other countries, especially North Korea, it might be close to 80% or something. But we might see countries drift up to the 40% range or 50% range. And so as that percentage climbs, the number for that area falls. That means the country has less economic freedom in that particular area. Okay, questions or comments on that? So on your notes, make sure you write on here the expenditure approach to real GDP, or GDP. We don't have to put necessarily real, but put your cigarettes equation, put these percentages in there, and then add G over Y equals government spending as a fraction of GDP, or as a fraction of income. Let's put just parentheses income, because remember we've always been using those interchangeably, because the spending of the nation turns out to be equal to the income of the nation, which then brought us into income per capita, income per person, that sort of thing. So G, as a fraction of our overall GDP, gives you kind of the level of government spending that's going on. And so here's the key point. As there's an increase in G over Y, as that percentage grows, that leads to less economic freedom. As that percentage grows, that leads to less of an economic freedom score. Might be the better way to put that. Now I'm getting into kind of the guts of how the number is actually measured. And the reason I wanted to be careful that I added the word score is that our goal is not no government. Our goal is not anarchy. In fact, a lot of places might have, a lot of places that are in bad shape, I should say, a lot of places that are in bad shape might have this misappropriated or possibly even too low. So imagine if you're basically operating under anarchy and there is no government, it's zero. You would score potentially high in terms of this particular area, the way they're doing it. But then a little bit of government that includes police and courts and rule of law and stuff, assuming that it was a good government, not a corrupt government, a little bit of government might help really bump up your freedom. If you don't have to sleep with a gun under your pillow because you're worried about people coming in to steal your money and stuff, does that feel better for you? Does that actually give you more freedom as a human if you don't have to sleep with a gun under your pillow? Does everybody agree with that? Yeah? So your real economic freedom might start to grow as a good government would get into place. But for the most part, especially in the developed countries and other places, this is at least giving us a measure of that individual freedom of where are decisions being shifted. Are they being shifted to Washington, D.C. or other places? Okay, so that's one variable. Legal system and protection of property rights, I kind of just brought that up. How well is the court system and the rule of law? Are you at a judge's discretion if you get in front of them? Yeah, well, I feel like you broke the law, or is it really, set? Access to sound money. So we have the United States has the luxury of having our money supply pretty sound, pretty responsible central government. But we don't always see that around the world, so they're going to measure like inflation. How much has inflation changed from year to year? More inflation means you don't have as much control or stability in your country. So if I was to add on to this, so let's put this as a comment for note for number 3. Maybe I should do a little bit for each one. So let's do area number 2. Legal system. We can just kind of shorthand call that protection of property rights. So an increase in rule of law and protection of individual property leads to an increase in economic freedom. What they do is they really are, they do survey work and they say, well, how well is your property protected in your country? How well do the police respond if you pick up the phone and say, hey, I have an emergency, 911. Not every country has a 911 system, right? All the things we take for granted as Americans, other people in other countries don't have that. And so that's what that measure is looking at. So number 3, sound money. Sound money is really going to look at inflation. So so stable, let's just put kind of what our goal was before. Low, stable inflation was one of the biggies that I tried to kind of push through in this class as a goal for every economy. Low, stable inflation leads to an increase in economic freedom. If inflation's starting to get away from you at 20% or 25% per month, all of a sudden you're not able to act as freely with the property that you own. You're worried that, oh, I'm losing money. I need to buy something right away before it goes up in price, right? We kind of worked through that idea. And so that measurement of inflation that we've been doing with the rate of change of the price level, that's going to be the instrument that's one of the variables to calculate this category. Any questions on that? Freedom to trade internationally. What do you think's going on in that category of international trade? Give me an example of things we did in the video and in this class that would tend to increase your personal economic freedom. Again, give you a higher score according to this index. What would need to be true in your country? Give me some examples. There's multiple of them, actually. Yeah, Jacob?
Low barriers.
Low barriers for trade. And so that was kind of the most general way. Give me some barriers to trade, other people. Tariffs, good. What else? Quotas. Subsidies, foreign subsidies, regulations, all that kind of stuff that government would be imposing that could act as a barrier to international trade, which restricts you from buying some stuff from India or from China or from wherever. It's reducing your economic freedom. So international trade, let's use Jacob's thing here, a reduction, a down arrow on trade barriers. A down arrow on trade barriers or low trade barriers. Sorry, I'll start writing over there for the next one especially. Leads to an increase in economic freedom. So low trade barriers or a decrease in trade barriers leads to an increase in your economic freedom score. Okay, and then number 5, regulation. Regulation of the resources here, labor, capital, and business. What was the thing we did on the last video on Friday, those of you who are here, which is most of you? What was it that kind of stuck out to you? You can look back at your notes if you want with regulation. We talked about a few different cases. We had kind of the fun video of the video to DC and the video, I think the next one was a little bit on, I guess that was the minimum wage video, but the video to DC sticks out in my mind. Remember, it was kind of black and white with the little caricatures? What were some ideas here that were put forward to suggest to you how regulation plays out, maybe in different countries, but they were showing in the United States? What do you have? Let me go somewhere else, Jacob. Thank you. Let me go back here. What did you guys have on that video? Yeah. Minimum wage was a regulation, yeah. And before that, what was the one from the DC? I think I told you to call it DC video or something. It was going through a number of cities. Sorry? Yeah, so government IDs that were needed. What else from that video that you had in your notes? So government IDs. What else did you have? State regulation kills new business. So it was, you had to register your business. Remember the guy that couldn't operate out of his home, right? So that's a regulation. So if you're an entrepreneur with a new idea and you're like, oh, I got this great idea, I can't really afford to rent out an office space at this point or a commercial space on Ottawa Main Street, I'm just going to work out of my home. There could be regulation on the books that says you can't work out of your home. You have to go to the city and maybe spend a $100 fee to get the blessing from the city to open up your business. So licensing fees. Have you guys heard about the hair braiding? It's been in the news a little bit. So what was the hair braiding? You said yep, Andrew? Or
yeah.
What was your understanding of the hair braiding thing?
Well, so there's some people who like offer services of like braiding hair,
Yeah.
and hairstylists kind of have issues with that.
Yeah,
They have to go
exactly.
to court and get licensed, things like that, to do the same kind of thing.
So hairstylists have to go through a lot of education and on-the-job training. What do they call it?
Certificate program.
The what?
It's like certification.
Yeah, certification program, and so there's like hours of cutting hair that have to be kind of certified by the state for you to become a hairstylist, right? And so all of a sudden, hair braiding might come in and out of style over the years, right? So it was pretty hot here within the last 5 years, and so a number of people who said, I know how to braid hair. They're like, I'm gonna open up my own hair braiding business, you know, $20, get your hair braided. Run an ad on Facebook, Swamp and Talk, or whatever, something like that, for braiding hair. Well, they were like, that's not fair. We want the hair braider, they need to be certified. They need to be licensed. And so they had to have a license, and it was petitioned mostly by the hair salons that already went through the government hoops. They're like, I want that business. I don't want you to be able to braid hair in your basement. And so they were forcing those people to get a license to braid hair. And so the point is, are they really protecting public safety? Is there something really dangerous about braiding hair that, oh, somebody might get hurt? You better be blessed by the government that you have a license to braid hair. Does that sound reasonable to you guys? That, you know, you might have lice on your pick or something, which, you know, but you go back. How would the market, by the way, discipline that? If you went to a hair braider, first time you answered a Facebook Swap and Talk deal, you went in and you freaking got lice or some other weird thing going on in your hair, what would you do? Like, shouldn't the government protect us from that? Or what would you do if you got lice and you went to a hair braider? Seriously, like, what would you do?
Get on Yelp.
Get on Yelp, yeah, give them a bad review. Could you sue them? You could sue them. Now, that has pain and suffering. We're going through the process of suing them. But if you had to buy like lice shampoo and, you missed a day of work or something, or something like that. If you had some sort of damages, you could go to small claims court and sue that person. But probably more effective would be to jump on Swap and Talk and say, hey, don't go to Sally's braiding thing that she just started up. I got lice when I went there. How many more people do you think are going to go to Sally's braiding? Not much. Does word circulate in today's society pretty fast? Yeah, right, with social media and other things. And so that is the market response to a bad producer, if you will, that's braiding hair and wasn't keeping a clean shop or whatever the case was. That would be the market discipline. So the question is, do we really need the government to give a blessing for these licenses? Not for those, I would argue. I don't think that's that important to have a license in that regard. I don't think there's a big public harm. What's really going on is the existing companies trying to create a kind of a monopoly, but a barrier to entry, right? They're trying to keep competition out. So another section from this was on competition and the importance of competition. And so if the hair salons are able to lobby their politicians and force hair braiders to have a license similar to what they have, they're effectively creating a barrier to competition so that they can keep people out. Okay, so that's kind of part of what tries to be captured with this general area. There's a number of different variables in there, but let's put that example down. So example, hair braiding business. Hair salons fought to make new hair braid competitors get a license and or certification. Even though there was no significant public risk. So in general, what the index is trying to measure is that an increase in regulations lead to a decrease in economic freedom. In some cases, if there's some awful public risk involved, maybe it's justified. But the index is going to take information from various external sources to say, well, what is the regulation? What type of regulation? Is it causing a decrease in competition? That sort of thing. All right, so any questions on those? That's digging in another level of detail deeper into how we create this index. And then I just want to give you a few samples, and then we're going to get back into another video here. So again, that is the world. Which ones are the most free countries? What color? Blue. And the least free? Red. And so they're broken into quartiles. So all 162 countries are broken into the top quartile, the bottom quartile, and then the middle. And then all of the countries' numbers are just from high to low. And that's the handout that gives you an example of one of the old rankings that are on there. So here's some data from 2016. There is one more recent than this. So this is the top 10. United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, United States, Switzerland, New Zealand, Hong Kong has been in the #1 position for a long time, even though they're having some issues that we briefly touched on before. So these are the single number that takes all 42 of those variables from those 5 areas and distills it into a single number. Here is from the various quartiles, kind of just a selection of countries. So in the least free, Venezuela at the bottom, Argentina, Brazil. So there's quite a few in the least free category. Outside of Africa, South America has tended to be down there as well. India was in the news this morning because our President Trump was over in India, and it sounded like it was a pretty resounding thing. I'm glad that I can't wait to check my stocks. I placed a personal investment in India because of learning this content. So I thought this would be reasonable to share. I'm not going to share you how much money I invested, but I took part of my long-term retirement investments, and it started with Modi. Modi's the Prime Minister of India, and he was making a lot of positive changes to India in these 5 areas. So he stabilized the currency, he made attempts at least to stabilize the currency. I mean, it's been up and down, but he's moved in the right direction with it. So stabilizing the currency, simplifying the tax code, trying to eliminate corruption. So basically, right down the list, Modi got elected in about, well, he just got reelected. What year?
2014.
14. So 2014, and I had gone to India at this time and saw like, oh wow, this guy's really doing some changes here. It's not without controversy, by the way, on some of the stuff he's doing, because this is a bold move. But India, what's their population like?
They're the second largest.
Second or first, actually, yeah. So they're right head in head with China. They're real close, about 1.3 billion people. So I looked at this and like, geez, if this guy's actually reforming the country with a lot of this economic freedom business, what should be happening to GDP? Should be going up, right? And so how is that being generated? Well, from the individual companies. So I had the opportunity to go to the stock market exchange, basically their New York Stock Exchange in India is in Mumbai. And so there's what's called the Nifty 50 is kind of the top 50 Indian companies. And so I took a share of my personal retirement wealth and moved it into all India companies. I didn't take a lot. I'm not willing to place a big bet, by the way. But I did take a decent chunk and invested in all India companies. If you do some mutual funds, you can invest in like developing countries, and then it'll be some India, some China, some other ones. I didn't want China because I really had thought that India was making the biggest progress with this. So I had to kind of do some special maneuvering to find all India companies, and I found them. And then, so I couldn't be happier today in the shower this morning, listening to NPR and the resounding positive news coming from relationships with the United States and India from this visit. And I think it was all positive sign. I assume my stock portfolio is up this morning. It's been relatively flat. This is a long-term bet. I didn't expect it to happen, overnight. I'm going to keep my money there for a while unless I start to see signs that, maybe a new prime minister comes to office and the country starts moving back to Gandhi era policy, which was not good overall for the country in terms of the stuff we're talking about here. So short of that, I'm in it for the long haul, and I couldn't be happier this morning that it looked like the US and India are working together to build a relationship, unlike what's happening with China, with the trade battles and fights and stuff there, and the continuation of more communist type policies, whereas Modi is making a more movement towards freer markets. So, questions or comments on that? Just thought I'd share that with you, that sometimes this economic stuff isn't all lofty out in the clouds, like I'm hoping to make some money off this stuff, and it really came from this index. And India, by the way, was like 118th if you kind of go back through the time. They were before a lot lower than that, and so they're continuing to move up in the ranks. Okay, so Mexico down here, kind of near the border, but near our border, of course, but near the border of the second and third quartile. So they've got some movement that direction. So that is kind of a selection of nations. And that's it. That's all I wanted to introduce you for right now off the PowerPoint. So let's see, we did that one. This this is so short and cute. I'm just going to.
Imagine you had to
You
live
guys
in a
saw this
country
one already,
from
but it might
these
make a
two
little more
lists
sense.
for the rest of your life. Which list would you choose? If you're like most people, you would choose A. Let's take a look at why that is. Take Chile and Venezuela. Chile's poverty rate is half that of Venezuela's, and its inflation rate is a fraction of the size. Actually, all of list A appears to be better off than B. Look at income per person. It's 10 times higher on average in list A. But these lists aren't organized by income. They're organized by economic freedom. List A countries have the most free economies in the world. List B, the least free. Across the globe, we see a strong relationship between economic freedom and people's quality of life. For instance, people in the most free countries earn, on average, over 8 times more than people in the least free. The poor earn 10 times more. People in the most free countries are happier. They have better protected civil rights, cleaner environments, and the average person lives 20 years longer. The freest countries also have less corruption, less infant mortality, less child labor, and less unemployment. So if you care about improving people's lives, then you really care about economic freedom. And having economic freedom means your property is protected under an impartial rule of law. You're free to trade with others for what you need and want. Your money keeps its value because your national currency is stable. And government stays small relative to the size of the economy.
Just a snippet of what we saw before. Okay, so now that concludes part 2. So your homework again for Wednesday, I'd like you to just get in and read that content on part 2 of your material. When you guys open up your thing, yours looks a little different than mine because I've got, there's 4 parts to the book is what I wanted to call your attention to. And so you're starting with 2.1. The legal system, and I think it actually has, you won't have that module thing. It looks like this. This was the first video that we played out of the sequence, so it's part 2. So you're only so don't start part 1. Part 2 and part 3 of the 4-part book is what we're doing for this macro class. And part of the reason is that part 1 is some of the stuff we've already talked about and done, and now this is trying to tie some of that stuff together. All right, so where am I here? Module 8. Yes, part 3. Okay. So here we go. So part 3. You can put on your notes introduction. So this is the part 3. 10 key elements of economic thinking about the role of government. This is where some of the stuff is really going to overlap with our Mod 8 from My Econ Lab on fiscal policy and government. So this will be some overlapping stuff as well.
As we have shown, if markets are going to operate smoothly, they need rule of law, protection of property rights and enforcement of contracts, and access to money of stable value. Governments promote prosperity when they provide these services. Governments may also promote prosperity by providing public goods, things that markets find hard to supply. But what if governments move beyond these limited functions? Can democracy alone be counted on to direct the actions of government in a manner that will help us grow and prosper? In this part of the course, we'll use the tools of economics to examine how the democratic political process works. We'll address questions like, does government spending favor ordinary people or does it favor well-organized interest groups? Why has government debt grown so rapidly in so many countries, including the United States? Do income transfer programs really help the poor lift themselves out of poverty? Do elected officials spend more wisely than we would? Most everyone recognizes that economics helps us understand how markets work, but the tools of economics also enhance our knowledge of how the political process operates and what might be done to make it work better. This is the focus of the next 4 modules. This part is one of the most exciting and eye-opening in all of economics.
Have you guys ever thought about how different it must be to live in the Middle East?
I'm sure it's different, but I think we helped in the long run. I just don't understand why we're still in Iraq after all this time.
I mean, I don't think we ever had
You guys are always complaining about politicians.
Because they're an easy target. They constantly change their position on issues.
I think it's a hard job.
A liberal Democrat got elected and crossed to end 2 wars. We kept spending on the military like we're going to be fighting the whole world. They kept saying we're out of Iraq. We still have, what, 50,000 guys there?
A lot of the guys over there are women. And there's plenty of women in Afghanistan too, fighting in a country where women don't even have rights. That's irony. Girls there can't even go to school.
That is harsh.
No problem. I'm serious. People get killed trying to teach girls over there.
War.
Hope. Yeah.
What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Say it again. Oh! But it's the same for Republicans. They claim to be for reduced taxes and less government. And you have the president who spends and spends and borrows and borrows.
And the deficit keeps growing and growing. And who's going to have to pay for it?
Where did the trillions for bailing out these big banks come from?
You know, I've never really thought about it until I took what I thought was going to be this boring economics class. The government gets money either through taxes or by printing more money, which comes out of our pockets as inflation.
And they say free speech is great, but then they censor the internet?
Yeah, that really worries me. I just have no confidence that these politicians won't try to do exactly that. They promise one thing and then do another.
Yeah, remember when they promised better snow plowing if you're sending those text messages about the streets we live on?
Yeah, I did that and they never showed up. Then they towed my boyfriend's car because he couldn't get it out of his tow drifts. The fine was huge.
And what about the promise for affordable housing?
Well, I mean, I think affordable housing is flawed. But either way, it's just another example. With politicians, you barely ever get what they promise.
And you know what I do when I'm depressed? I shop.
So is there ever a time when you're not thinking about shopping?
You're on the top, Mr. Preppy.
You know about that car that's really good on you? Where'd you get that?
Oh, thanks. You know, I don't remember. It was either JCPenney's or Old Navy. Either way, it's perfect. And the price is right.
I love Old Navy. I literally do all my shopping there. And they have the best deals around. Old Navy's pretty good. And it's my store.
Amazon.com, Heaven on Earth.
I found a website the other day where you can buy barbecue equipment and sauces online.
You can find just about anything shopping online. It seems like there's endless choices. I actually even started buying food and having it delivered.
Well, you know what makes nourishment better? Good company. And I vote we adjourn to Starbucks.
Yes, best place to hang out and best coffee.
You know, I'm not really a coffee person, but their chai latte is my cup of tea.
Okay. Sounds good to me. Is there anything sporting goods by there? I'm gonna check out the running shoes.
Death and taxes, or as Beth and her friend said, debt and taxes. They're right. Government definitely exerts a major impact on our lives. Did you notice the students were less happy with government issues, but happier with the free market options when they discussed recent purchases? Why is that? Let me explain. When federal, state, and local government spending is combined, it equals about 40% of national income. Added in regulatory compliance, and the cost is even greater. We've established that government is necessary to protect people, property, and markets from aggressors who use violence, theft, and fraud to harm others. We also need a legal system that settles disputes and enforces contracts, as well as provides a stable monetary system. We also count on government to provide public goods, things like national defense that are difficult to supply through markets. There's a tendency to have a romantic view of voting. We all get to participate. The vote of each person counts the same. What could be better? To answer this question, let's step back and take a look at how resources are allocated through our democratic system. Political voting is actually an alternative form of economic organization. Resources are assigned to different uses by our votes or by the officials voted into office. there are three basic differences between political, aka government, and market allocation. First, majority rule provides the basis for government action in a democratic society. In contrast, market activity is based on mutual agreement and voluntary exchange. In a democratic setting, when a majority, either directly or through their elected representatives, adopts a policy, the minority is forced to help pay for it even if they strongly disagree. In the market, as we learned earlier in the course, the parties all agree to the transaction or it doesn't happen. Second, the political process imposes the same option on everyone. Government allocation results in a one-size-fits-all outcome. Markets allow for more diversity. Different individuals and groups are permitted to choose different alternatives, as long as they are willing to pay for them. Third, the political process does not have anything like profits and losses. Nothing in government can be counted on to consistently channel resources toward productive projects and away from those that are counterproductive. In the political arena, votes and campaign contributions matter. The drive to stay in office compels politicians to search for and support projects that will enhance their chances of winning elections. Sometimes such projects will be productive, but in other cases, there's good reason to expect that resources will be squandered on inefficient activities. Something else to think about. If you go out for a meal and someone else is paying the bill, you're more likely to purchase exactly what you want without considering the price. It's easy to spend other people's money. However, if you're picking up the tab yourself, price is going to play a role in your choice. Government has no money of its own. It all comes from the taxpayers via what we said at the beginning is one of the two certain things in life, taxes. Economists help us understand how political processes work. It teaches us when we can count on government to help us grow and prosper and when we can't. Let's explore this important topic in more detail.
All right, get your last comments down on that video. What were some of your key points that you took away? Go back here. Take care. Let's see, who can talk last? Andrew, at some point you talk. Give me a number between, let's go 4 and 7. Andrew, number between 4 and 7.
You're asking me.
Give me a number between 4 and 7.
5.
5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Give me your name again. Hunter. What do you think? What was your takeaway from the video? You can just speak from the heart if you want. You don't have to read from your notes. But you watched the video, right? Okay.
I wrote down at the Peninsula line inflation.
So what?
Printing of money caused inflation.
Printing of money caused inflation. Did they talk about that in the video?
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So yes, printing of money. I didn't remember that one. So what was so important about that? Did it cause, I mean, what does it increase economic freedom or decrease economic freedom? Increase freedom if there's inflation? Decrease. Good. Decrease. Good. All right, who else? What else? Somebody else back here. What did you have from the video? You go.
Well, this one's a
Easy to spend other people's money. Yeah, that's, I got a short little video that I'll show in a sec. What else did you have? What's this protective? Well, I put gender equality up there. I wanted to show you something real quick on where you want to live. If you like gender equality, let's see here. Is that one? There we go. This one. So this is kind of interesting. So most free, least free. And one of the innovations that they put into the index just 3 or 4 years ago, they realized that in some places women didn't have the same rights as men, right? I mean, historically, that was true in the United States too. So there's been changes over time. And so they added gender equality into part of the measurement. So that is embodied to some degree in the measurement now. And this is what we find in general, that women have more rights in more free countries. And look at the difference here. Boom, boom, boom. That's kind of the consistency that we see, that as freedom, as individual economic freedom starts to go up, we start to get, you know, a better result, I think, for individuals in countries where there's just generally more freedom from other areas too, regulation and other things. But that's kind of an interesting thing on the gender question. Protective function of government. What is the protective function? That's what this section's really on. What is the government protecting? If they have a function, one of the functions of government would be argued is to have a protective function. What are they protecting? Us, the people, from foreign invasion. That would be one area, yes. Not the only, though. Other people from ourselves, yeah, right? So the protective function of government is to say, let's let everybody do what they want to do, to have freedom, as long as what they're doing doesn't infringe on other people's freedom. That was our starting place in our definition. At the end here, or give property as long as their actions do not violate the identical rights of other people in that. So we don't have privileged people that get to do some stuff without breaking the law, and other people that would be breaking the law, right? So it's equal around there, that we can do pretty much what we want to do with our property, and it's going to be protected through police and court systems and the legal system. That's what that area, or that component's picking up. All right, what did you guys have down for this political versus market allocation? I think that's a real important one. What were some of the highlights, whether you have them written down on your page or not, but political versus market allocation?
They kind of talked about how political voting is another form of economic allocation. So
Political voting is what?
another form of market allocation.
It is another, well, it's another form of allocation. It's not a market allocation.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I wanted to touch on. What was the key things, key differences, I guess, between a market allocation versus a political allocation, Aaron?
So like they're talking about how like politicians, they promise everything but you never receive all of it.
Okay.
And with market allocation, you kind of have your options, so you're more happier with having more.
Okay, so that was one element of it, with that you're getting to make more choices. So who wants to add on to that?
In government, the minority who is against it still has to comply with it, where in the market they don't.
Yeah, yeah. So that's kind of the main thing, is that in a market system, what's the V word that's really important? What are your actions and your choices are? Voluntary is the big V word, right? So in a market system, we have a voluntary choice of every individual at the individual level. You choose whether you want to buy a Snickers bar or not. You choose what you want to have for school lunches. How many people had crappy school lunches when they were K through 12 at some point, right? So you get to choose that type of stuff, not some government bureaucrat that said, oh, we got to have nutrition at this level and there's got to be a certain mix of this or that, right? So your choices were reduced. In certain cases. Now, is it impossible for the government to come up with a really nice selection of food for you to have a healthy selection? No, it's totally possible. Then you ask yourself, well, why doesn't it happen? Why is my lunch crappy, right? And it's because the allocation mechanism was different. So it's not that it would be impossible for government to have a great selection of food, but given all the other complexity and constraints of where the money's coming in and who we hire and how we do it and blah, 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 then the government's really, for all practical purposes, not able to get a good solution as maybe a more market-based solution might get you. So there's the lack of competition we just came out of. So all that kind of stuff with the political process. We're going to see some other videos that will hopefully get that through, but the political process, as Bryce was pointing out, with the majority rule, you are stuck with whatever the majority picked. Or, with our case of representation in our country, you elect a politician or elect officials in, that was your choice. Those politicians offered a bundle of goods that you were hoping to get. Sometimes they keep their promises, sometimes they don't keep their promises, sometimes they keep 70% of their promises and 30%. If they don't keep the one that you voted them in for, then that sucks for you, right? And all of a sudden it's all complex, but the main thing is you're gonna get stuck with some bundle of policy that may or may not be what you were hoping for.
It's like tragedy of the commons also kind of the same thing where like it's got more government control.
Yeah, it is. So yeah, so Andrew's bringing up tragedy of commons, that we're trying to have a common decision essentially, and that might get kind of not the best results. So it's similar to the common. The common part is that we're trying to come up with a common solution for everybody, and that can be subject to elements of the tragedy of the commons. The true tragedy of the commons, just to kind of go a little bit further with that, is if you have a lack of property rights, if nobody owns the hallway at your apartment building, nobody actually owns of the residents that are there, it's not their personal property, the hallway will probably start to get trashed more than your bedroom will, right? Or the common space. So that's kind of the idea of the tragedy of the commons with not getting good outcomes. Okay, well, let's listen to, if you guys want to put in your notes, Milton Friedman, Uncle Milty. So this is Milton Friedman, short little video clip here that he's going to be on. I think this is one he's on the talk show. So
when you see around the globe the maldistribution of wealth, the desperate plight of millions of people in underdeveloped countries, when you see so few haves and so many have-nots, when you see the greed and the concentration of power with it, did you ever have a moment of doubt about capitalism and whether greed's a good idea to run on?
Well, first of all, tell me, is there some society you know that doesn't run on greed? Do you think Russia doesn't run on greed? You think China doesn't run on greed? What is greed? Of course, none of us are greedy. It's only the other fellow who's greedy. The world runs on individuals pursuing their separate interests. The great achievements of civilization have not come from government bureaus. Einstein didn't construct his theory under order from a bureaucrat. Henry Ford didn't revolutionize the automobile industry that way. In the only cases in which the masses have escaped from the kind of grinding poverty you're talking about, the only cases in recorded history are where they have had capitalism and largely free trade. If you want to know where the masses are worst off, it's exactly from the kinds of societies that depart from that. So that the record of history is absolutely crystal clear, that there is no alternative way so far discovered of improving the lot of the ordinary people that can hold a candle to the productive activities that are unleashed by free enterprise.
So it seems to reward not virtue as much as ability to manipulate the system.
And what does reward virtue? You think the communist commissar rewards virtue? You think a Hitler rewards virtue? You think, excuse me, if you'll pardon me, you think American presidents reward virtue? Do they choose their appointees on the basis of the virtue of the people appointed or on the basis of their political clout? Is it really true that political self-interest is nobler somehow than economic self-interest? You know, I think you're taking a lot of things for granted. And just tell me where in the world you find these angels who are going to organize society for us. Well, I don't even trust you to do that.
all right. So what was Milton saying here in terms of maybe a big government versus a country that has more economic freedom at the individual level? What was his message? What did you get out of that one? They both what? They both run on greed, right? We can't escape the self-interest. You go to Joseph Dan?
You said something like there's no alternative action for yourself.
Okay, no alternative compared to working for yourself. So the greed part is everywhere. And so what was Milton's argument to say, under that setup, a more capitalist society would be better? What helps constrain the greed? If greed can't disappear under one system or the other, what is the key ingredient that helps a country and its citizens achieve the type of outcomes that we've been talking about? Longer life expectancy, lower infant mortality rates, less poverty, better gender equality. What's the secret sauce that makes the economic freedom argument help keep greed in check a little bit better? What do they have compared to going the bigger government route?
Individual freedom,
Individual freedom?
choices, economic freedom,
Okay.
self-control.
Self-control. Boy, I don't know about that one on an individual. I don't know if we can rely on self-control. That's an interesting one to bring up. So, I mean, it would kind of say, well, what keeps that person controlled so that the individual has more self-control, or what really keeps the individual in check in a more capitalist market-based system? Aaron?
Money.
Money in what way?
Like, if you don't have very much money, then you can afford to go out and buy.
Okay, that might be a motivation, and so you want to earn money, and so you want to make a profit, right? So it's motivating in that regard. And then what happens to keep the person from being too greedy in terms of charging too high of prices? Taxes? No. Competition. If they're making big time bucks and they're being really greedy, like I used to get $10 for these books that I was selling, but I'm going to charge $25, right? It's like, well, sure, their self-interest hasn't gone away, but what is the market discipline? What's the thing that cracks the whip on that greedy, self-interested person? Competition. Somebody else is going to open up a shop and bring those prices down. They're going to be forced to compete. So then, think about that for a second. How does that contrast if greed doesn't go away? What's the main difference when people in office start to run the society with bigger government, more government control over resources and more spending and higher taxes and other things? What's missing?
No competition.
No competition, thank you, right? So that's the difference, is that when you make it legal, there was kind of a famous economist that I think it's mentioned at least in here, called named Frederick Bastiat, and he called it legal plunder. So if we think of, it's kind of an old term that might be like a pirate. They're getting their plunder. What does it mean to plunder? What are you doing if you're a pirate and you're plundering? Taking somebody's gold, right? A plunder is you're stealing, essentially. And he said in a system like our own, that's not the biggest fear, because we can develop a court system and a police system that would try to constrain the greed in that way, right? We put that person in jail. We charge them a high enough fine. So the laws of the land, in terms of individual economic freedom, we can kind of handle that type of plunder, that type of stealing at the individual level. However, if the greedy person gets into government and now is able to pass laws that protect them and get more tax dollars coming to them or their family, essentially stealing, but since they passed the laws of the land, it's legal stealing. That was the thing that Bastiat thought was the worst, right? It doesn't get any worse than that. If you can bend the laws to particular individuals, that's the fear here. When that type of greed is allowed to exist and there's no competition to keep it in check, you don't want to really live in that type of society. And so it's better to promote competition. It's better to promote economic freedom because that kind of greed has an automatic check and balance through other people's potential greed or their self-interest. Does that kind of make sense on kind of how we're setting that up with what we're measuring in terms of economic freedom and stuff too? Okay, other people's money. I want to do this video. This is the perfect time to do this one. I think I got it saved right here. Maybe, let's see. Oh, the big government cheese. That's a good one. Yep, here it is. Okay.
The 4 ways we spend money in the same person.
Whoops.
You spend your own money on yourself.
Hold on. How do I get back to that? I'm just going to close this window. All right, let me try that again. Just trying to make it
The 4
bigger.
ways we spend money in the same person. You spend your own money on yourself. You spend somebody else's money on yourself. You spend your own money on somebody else, or you spend somebody else's money on somebody else. I learned most of this from Milton Friedman. When you spend your own money on yourself,
Okay, go ahead and write this down. Put this 4 quadrants on your notes. I want this to be in your notes. This is such a clever little way of thinking about things. Spending your own money on yourself. Spending somebody else's money on yourself. Spending your own money on somebody else. And then spending somebody else's money on somebody else. So get the 4 quadrants kind of on your notes, and then as they talk, this is only a 2-minute video, as they talk through the video, you can add in your quadrants examples of what type of thing they're talking about. So spending your own money on yourself, that's the one we do the most of, right? Spending your own money on yourself, personal finance class, right? So that's our market system, you choosing what you want to do for yourself. Here we go.
Be real careful about what you're spending as well as what you're getting. If it's a big item like a car or a house, you're going to shop around pretty good because it's for you and your family, and you're going to negotiate a good price. Now, when you spend somebody else's money on yourself, like when the boss is paying for the meal and he's not there, you might be more apt to pass on that burger and fries and go for the steak and lobster because you're not as careful about the money as you are about what you're getting. Now, when you spend your own money on somebody else, like when you're buying a present, you tend to set a budget for yourself because it's your money, but you're not quite as careful about what you get, especially if you don't know them terribly well. Now, before we go on to the final quadrant, let's take a quick look at the careful scale.
Okay. So, what was the example of spending somebody else's money on yourself? Dinner, steak dinner. So you go out with your parents or you go out with grandpa. Are you ordering what you'd want to order if it was your own money, or because it's grandpa, maybe I can get the a little bit nicer plate of ribs, the half rack of ribs instead of macaroni and cheese, right? So nothing wrong with that, just pointing out that we might make different decisions when it's not our own money. And then what was the thing about spending your own money on somebody else? A present, birthday present or something else. So now we're going to look at the careful meter.
You tend to be high on the careful scale when you're buying things for you and your family because you're an expert on what you and your family want and need. As you move farther away from you and your family in city spending, state spending, national spending, and world spending, you tend to be less careful because it's just hard to know what a family might want or need in another country.
So when we talk about self-interest in this class, I've tried to say continuously that self-interest does not mean selfish. So on this picture here, if you are selfish, where is all your interest lie? Right in the middle, right? So there's selfishness. Self-interest, though, you can allow you to care about, of course, your family and your friends, people close to you, maybe some people that live in your city that you work with, or other things going on here in Ottawa. Maybe your state, you've got a little bit of Kansas pride or something. You paid a little bit of attention to Kansas politics, but not much, right? The nation, the country, the world. And so it's just kind of laying down your interests may lie still in some people in other countries. So I've talked about my wife being involved with some things in Guatemala with education and more. So that it's possible for you to have an interest here, but it's probably relatively small, right? But my wife's self-interest does include some folks over in Guatemala. So it's not that that's not possible, but when we think about who we can care for in a meaningful way, this starts to make a little bit of sense on this meter.
State. Of course, it's certainly obvious that we're all more familiar and understand our own countries better than other countries, our own states better than other states, our own cities better than other cities, and certainly we know our own families and ourselves better than we do others. And that's why we spend more carefully when our spending is closer to home. And that brings us to our fourth spending quadrant, spending somebody else's money on somebody else. You tend not to be quite as careful about how much you're spending, because it's not your money, and you're not quite as careful about what you're getting. This tends to be the least effective quadrant, and of course, this is government. It seems year after year, politician after politician, Washington proves that they're the least careful in spending money, because it's not their money, and they don't know the people and places that the money's being spent on. So it's a good idea to spend that money in more efficient quadrants in the form of things like charitable write-offs, tax cuts, or vouchers for school choice. It's worth asking yourself, what quadrant is the next big government spending plan going to be in? Now that you know the full way you can spend money.
All right. So, any questions or comments on that little video? It's one of my favorites. Talk about greed. Okay, let's move on to the next section here. So this is the protective function. Whoops. Is this being taped? Oh, whoopsie. Okay, sometimes that happens. All right, so here's our first one from Stossel.
Thank goodness for government. It gives us rule of law.
So put Stossel
peace, make sure no one
protective function.
Attack.
For your notes, put Stossel protective function. Stossel protective function. Stossel, S-T-O-S-S-E-L. That's this guy's name, John Stossel.
You or steals your property. America needs that. But today, our government does much more than that. Government today runs trains, subways, schools, parks, public housing, welfare, Medicare, Social Security, war on drugs. It provides water, sewer systems, snow removal, trash collection, ambulances. It subsidizes students, farmers, Indians, researchers, volunteers, small businessmen, rich businessmen, and performance artists. It inspects fruit, pickles, mattresses, toys, cars, garage doors, and barbecue grills. It polices the world, suppresses vice, and puts opera on TV.
It's very nice to have classical music on PBS. I like it, I listen to it, I watch it.
But, says Chapman University philosophy professor Tibor McCann, it's wrong to make Americans pay for programs they may not want.
This is the politicians substituting their judgment for our judgment. Exactly what gives them that right?
We elected them to do that. It's democracy.
If you believed in democracy being that bloated, you could vote haircuts democratically, you could vote ties democratically, you could vote everything, marriages democratically. The founders tended to believe that government should be restricted, it should be limited to the function of securing our rights.
The founding fathers never talked about a government giving people things. They said it should have limited duties like running the post office, the courts, and printing money. For 150 years, that's about all it did. The focus was on guaranteeing liberty.
Liberty is too precious a thing to be buried in books.
When Mr. Smith came to Washington in the 30s, the government was just beginning its explosive growth. Roosevelt's New Deal went beyond liberty. It promised people jobs, retirement benefits, health care.
Bill after bill poured into Congress from the White House. Whatever Roosevelt wants, he gets.
And every president since FDR, Democrat or Republican, signed on to this new idea of expanded government.
Strengthen the arts, fight teen pregnancy, prevent violence among young people, promote racial healing.
And we'll have all seniors afford prescription drugs.
Washington's become a kind of grab bag where people with demands line up in the streets. And the lobbyists line up inside.
They see the system there and they grab whatever they can from that system.
And who pays for it all? Joe. You do. Joe taxpayer. These roofs are melting tar in 100-degree weather. Yet $1 out of every $3 they make doing this goes to the government.
Americans pay more in taxes than we do in food, clothing, and shelter combined.
Amity Schlaze wrote The Greedy Hand, a book about what the government takes from us. You'd be surprised at what it takes from you. For example, Bill and Mary Thurston of St. Louis pay taxes all the time, even when they're not aware of it. At 4 in the morning, when Bill's alarm goes off, they're already paying 5% to the count for electricity. Brushing his teeth, 2 taxes on the toothpaste. A sewer fee for this. And when he takes a shower,
There's water tax. Money goes down that drain too.
to drive somewhere, the Thurstons pay taxes for his truck and her minivan. And when they buy gas, they pay much more. Work is where Americans pay most of our taxes. Bill's one of those roofers we saw earlier. And while he and the rest of the crew are out slopping tar, it takes 2 employees back at the company's offices just to calculate how much to withhold from their paychecks.
It's gonna feel tight, okay?
Because Bill's wife Mary works as a nurse, the Thurstons pay a marriage tax.
Their marriage penalty bill is over $1,000.
Then there's the grocery tax, property tax, utility tax, 2 cable TV taxes, 7 taxes on the phone, and finally a sin tax.
43% of what Bill pays for that bottle of beer is taxes.
What this means is that Americans on average have to work until May of every year, 4 months, just to pay off your taxes. For 4 months you sweat, not for yourself, but to pay for all those benevolent government programs.
Government is never charitable, never generous, never benevolent, because what is involved in government giving is government taking.
Okay, get your last comments there. Sounds like we should eliminate government from that video.
No more taxes.
All right, so what do you have from that video? Were you guys surprised at the number of taxes? Because most of you aren't paying taxes for the most part now, especially income tax. If you got a low income tax, you're not making a lot of money, then you probably haven't seen the type of taxes that are coming out. But all of those other things you might have seen that or been exposed to, or at least you've used them. Some of the things with the taxes and little bits and pieces here and there. So what was your comments?
Kansas taxes suck.
Kansas taxes suck. There was nothing on this particular video on Kansas taxes as near as I could tell. So Jim Harris. 4 months of work going to taxes, yeah. So it depends on what level you fall into. But yeah, if you make $100,000 a year, which would be combined, by the way. They mentioned kind of a marriage tax. That video is a little bit older. I mean, that type of stuff moves around. Sometimes policymakers might have something different. But if you're married and not filing individually, it's possible that in some cases your combined income bumps your additional dollars into a higher tax bracket. So that's where some stuff like that could happen depending on how you're filing. Again, they try to correct that for the most part. I don't remember when this video was made, but they've tried to make it pretty equal on marriage benefits. But that's why gay marriage was a big deal, was because of tax benefits to married people in some cases under the federal income tax. You did get a little bit of a break on it. So over time, those things evolve as we move through. But the bottom line is that there's a lot of different taxes out there. So again, back to the $100,000, you might be getting a $20,000 federal income tax bill on $100,000, and that's just the federal level. And then, as Daniel was pointing out, your state income tax is going to have a chunk. And then if you own a house, you have property taxes. That's different than all the other rates. So 3 to 4 months of income, depending on what your income level is, of course. But somewhere in a third of your income wouldn't be unusual that's going towards some form of taxation in one way, shape, or form. Okay, one more comment on the video. You don't have to agree with all these videos either, by the way. So if you want to challenge something, I love challenges. You should be challenging. That means you're really starting to think critically about some of the content. So feel free to do that too if you want. Yeah, Jacob?
43% of the cost of a bottle of beer is taxes.
43% of the cost of a bottle of beer is taxes. Yikes. We know that we need beer. Right? So, so that kind of brings up one of the ways that government has found it easier to tax over the year. They call them sin taxes. So sin in terms of the religious idea of sin. So let's tax something that, oh, it's against God's word for drinking and smoking and prostitution and other things, whatever the negative, cocaine, drugs, marijuana, you name it. We're going to be able to, politicians have found it easier to pass legislation for higher tax rates on sinful things, right? So drugs, sex, rock and roll, all of that is going to maybe face some higher tax rates than what other things are. So, and it's mostly because we need to raise money. We want more money from taxes. What should we tax? Gasoline? Sure, that sounds good. Cigarettes? Yeah, those are bad for people anyway. Let's raise the tax on cigarettes. So those are fall in the sin tax category. Okay, let's jump into the next one. This is kind of a continuation here for this one. So this is Stossel. You put Stossel continued if you want, or Stossel part 2. Yeah.
Government's the only institution in America that's allowed to use force, that has a legal right to make you do things. And everything government does, every regulation, every tax it imposes, is backed up by force or the threat of it in one form or another.
Sometimes the force comes in the form of a bulldozer. That's what's threatening this neighborhood in New Rochelle, New York. It's what you might call a mixed neighborhood. There are 2 thriving churches, 34 homes, 28 businesses. It's very diverse. People of different races live here in harmony. Residents told us they like their neighborhood the way it is.
We just had one big family there.
So what's the problem? Well, the problem is that city officials like the mayor don't like it.
No urban planner would ever design a neighborhood like that with a house next to an industrial site, next to a bus depot. That's not a neighborhood in my opinion.
The city's solution? Flatten the area and replace it with an IKEA furniture store. Lots of people around here are not happy about that.
They want to put us out of our homes and business and destroy 2 churches so they can come in and sell furniture?
Well, yes. These people may have deeds for their homes and businesses, but government can still just kick them off their property by using a law called Eminent Domain, which means superior ownership. Officials can take over your property if they decide it serves what they consider to be the greater good.
The government first used eminent domain to get land for new highways, bridges, parks. This woman was literally dragged from her home to make room for a park in Virginia.
Thank you. Please be seated.
These days, however, government officials use eminent domain for all kinds of things to help private companies expand. Not just IKEA, but Kmart, Home Depot, baseball teams, shopping malls. When this shopping mall in Texas wanted to expand into that neighborhood, the town just ordered everyone out and had the entire neighborhood bulldozed. That's the plan for a New Rochelle.
We have freedom, but where is the freedom? What freedom do we have when we have businesses that will just come in and say, oh, you have to move? There is no freedom.
I have to move my city forward and renew areas that have fallen into disrepair and into blighted conditions. And I think the only way to do that in a city of this size is to be able to reorganize things a little bit. What about freedom? The people there say they don't want to be reorganized. I think there's a need to understand how government can improve its community.
Now, I have to say, I like IKEA stores. These are great things to have around. But should families be forced out to make room for them?
Is it right to clear people from their homes? Is that right?
Dominic Gataletta's family has lived here since he was 2. He remembers his mother cooking pasta in the kitchen and the The same plot where his father used to grow tomatoes, Dominic now grows tomatoes. He and his wife Virginia wanted to leave the house to their children.
All the memories that I've had all these years, I've been there 67 years. You just don't wipe that away simply because the furniture store wants to be there. This is America? I don't think so.
You think of government, you think of government's there to help you.
They take your house. That's not a help.
They're not just going to take your house, they'll pay you for it.
You don't know what you're talking about.
She has a point. The city has to pay only what it says the homes are worth.
You're just asking people to move to a different site. You're not asking people, you're telling them, move. But we're going to try to find them adequate relocation headquarters.
I've never felt so powerless in my whole life. What's wrong with my American dream? Why is our king's American dream better than my American dream?
Because the politicians need to plan for everyone. They've decided a furniture store is what this town needs.
Is a furniture store today, and tomorrow what will it be? Will it be your home? Whose house, whose business will be next?
Politicians assume they know best, so they have the right to use force to fix things.
Okay. Eminent domain. If you've got policies where the government can more easily use eminent domain, does that tend to increase or decrease your economic freedom? Decrease, obviously, right? So you see the trade-offs that are involved. We talk a lot about taxes and government spending and stuff, but now there's even potentially stuff on the books where you're not protecting people's property, but in order to make the place a better thing according to the eyes of some, they might be able to take your property. It is taken with compensation. That's part of the whole eminent domain process, but it is out there. Derek.
And is that compensation determined by them themselves or like a third party?
A third party. So they'll use like an appraiser to come up with the value, but they might even offer 1.2, like 20% higher than something, right? So it can be kind of negotiable. I'd say in terms of the money, the government tries to be fair, but can we put a price tag on, I've owned this property for 3 generations and I want to pass it to my kids? Is that priceable? Well, maybe, like if you offered that person $1 million for their $60,000 property. As an economist, I'd like to think maybe, but there's been cases where people won't take whatever the amount is, right? They'll literally kind of, they're just grounded, the money's not that important, and they won't do it. But, so can it be compensated? It certainly works against their economic freedom. So one thing I want you to put in your notes from this section is what it's highlighting is 3 functions of government. We started off with the protective function. So functions of government, if you want to kind of put 1, 2, 3, functions of government: protective function, productive function, and redistributive function. So it's kind of all 3 of those.
What was the name of that town in New York? Rochester, right?
I think it was Rochester, yeah. So when a company, here's a question for you then. When a company's product harms a customer and the courts award damages to the customer, this is an example of the protective, productive, or redistributive function. Redistributive? When a company's product harms a customer and the court awards damages to the customer, it's protective, right? So again, that's what our legal system, protection of property rights, kind of the stuff that we started off at the top of the hour. Do we have that in place to help protect individuals? The whole eminent domain of potentially being able to, for the new real estate development that's coming through, that's not really being productive. What are they doing? Which form is that taking more of the role of? Redistributive, right? So it's taking from one person by force and giving it to another. So we're going to take it from the individual and redistribute it to the real estate developer, right, or whatever the deal is. So that's the redistributive function. So there's lots of this redistribution going on that we looked at in the previous chapters. So transfer payments in general, we're going to spend more time on it too. But take from the young, give to the old. What government program is that?
Social Security.
Social Security. Take from the employed, give it to the unemployed. Unemployment insurance, right? So unemployment insurance is really just a transfer of wealth. Take from the healthy, give to the sick. Medicare, Medicaid, right? So the government's involved in that process. Those might be all well-intentioned, but are they the best way to provide what we want to provide, or are there other ways to do it? So that's the redistributive function that our current government does. What would be the productive function? Anybody? So where the government's involved in the production of a good or service. The government's involved in the production, like a business would be doing, but the government's doing it instead. When they print money, they're producing money. There's a little bit of production function with that, yeah. What else? State workers, yes. So if we're building highways and freeways, we're making the highways and freeways, right? So that would be a production function, a productive function of the government. How about the post office? Who's a competitor with the post office? UPS, FedEx. Do we really need a post office anymore? Well, yeah, they've had relationships with some of it, but do we really need the government involved in the delivery of snail mail? Something to think about, right? So that's the kind of ideas we want to start thinking about. Market discipline. The government doesn't have to be subject to the same discipline that FedEx is and UPS. Want to raise the price of stamps? Raise the price of stamps. As long as we can get more taxpayer forced payment, your federal tax dollars are going to subsidize the U.S. Post Office. How many of you have used the U.S. Post Office in the last month? 1, 2, 3, right? So email, technology, FedEx, UPS, whatever, there might be opportunities to shift some of that over. So that is the 3 functions to kind of keep in mind. Productive function, redistributive function, I just said that in backwards, but productive function and protective function. And so we're really looking for, in the economic freedom score, more of the protective function and shifting more to individuals in terms of decision making. The redistributive function, private charities, would be kind of the market equivalent or market alternative to government welfare programs. We have private charity programs, right? So there's kind of alternatives, market-based alternatives that we can look at too. All right, last video. This one's a shorty here. So this is on government products. So if you want to put government products, that would be fine for this one. Here we go.
Whenever I'm in a voting booth trying to choose, I think this is another reason to keep government's powers limited. On election day, I have a few choices. A Democrat, a Republican, today maybe a Tea Party candidate or some other third or fourth party, but that's about it. What if you bought groceries that way? You get to choose between 2, maybe 3 shopping carts. Each is filled with groceries chosen by someone else. I look at cart A. Okay, I like the pineapple, I wanted that, but I really wanted a roll of paper towels, and this cart doesn't have that. Cart B has the paper towels, but it doesn't have the pineapple, and it has this pink shaving cream for me to shave my legs. I don't want that. Cart C has a pregnancy test kit and all kinds of expensive things I don't want, and things I don't want to pay for. 3 limited choices. This is like voting. In the voting booth, we can only choose from pre-filled carts, the candidates on the ballot. Even worse, no matter which cart I choose, I have to buy and eat whatever is in the cart that most of you chose. I really don't want cart C, but if the majority of you choose cart C, this is the candidate that we all get. It's another reason to keep government and the political part of life small. In private life, we have more options.
Okay, get your notes down on that one.
Whatever.
So how do we connect what he was trying to say there with the shopping carts versus maybe the last presidential election? We could think about this one, but I prefer to look at the last one. I know most of you didn't follow the political campaigns, right? But you've got Hillary Clinton. When it came down to the vote for president, we had Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump as your choices. And so that's what he's trying to kind of say here is that each candidate has a different bundle. What was in the Trump basket? Just a couple items. We don't have to let, it's way too complex. But what was in the Trump basket? Lower taxes. The wall is the one I wanted to make sure was out there, right? And is that a protective, productive, or redistributive function, the wall? It's a production type function, right? So yeah, so we have the wall, lower taxes, the wall, and probably some less regulation, immigration standards, right? So we had kind of this bundle of a basket that was offered, bundle A, and then in Hillary's basket, we had more of a less restrictions, no wall, of course, more open borders, more discussion or policy changes that way. So the point is, we really do end up having this basket concept, right? And we might even like a little bit in Hillary's basket, and a little bit in one, but whoever gets elected, it ultimately is kind of out of our control with the way that the political process works. So what is the economic freedom answer to that? How big of baskets do we allow potential candidates to have? What would be the thing that would increase your economic freedom if there's rules in place, whether the candidate is of whatever party? What are the things that we would have in terms of the size of their baskets? Are they big baskets or small? Small, right? So we have a more limited scope to what can be done by law, no matter who gets in office, right? That's part of what we're touching on. So we're not getting real, I guess, political here, but looking at the facts of how it manifests itself if we have certain ways, the way the country is set up. All right, we'll call it a day there. Good job. Those of you who weren't here, I had a few of the check. Were there extras back here that didn't get passed up? Well, I got all the unclaimed notes. Okay. I don't want today's. I just want the unclaimed. I think I got them all now. So if you didn't get your last Wednesdays, there was a few. I'll just have them on the table here for pickup. Would be just these from the previous days, like last Wednesday, or the first time, maybe Monday too, for that matter. No, you should still watch the recording. So yeah, anybody who missed last Friday, come up and see me. I've got a handful of you with excused absences, so you'll be able to make up.